all for joining. We've got so many people on already, and technically we aren't due to start for another few minutes. So maybe while I still see the attendees growing, I will encourage everyone who's already joined. First of all, welcome. And as we get started today, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A function as opposed to the chat function. If you have questions as we go through the discussion, I am going to save some time at the end. We're going to have about 30-ish minutes of conversation, and then we're going to save some time at the end for people to get their questions answered. I cannot guarantee all questions will be answered. However, I will pose as many as possible if you put them in that Q&A function. So I am getting some messages that the audio is echoing, but I don't know if that's for everyone or just for one or two people. Is anyone else having that issue? We'll try to fix it before we start at 1:15. No echo from others. I think it's just a couple people, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know if it's an issue on your end. In any case, I think we should get started. What do you all think? Yeah, let's do it. Okay. So, first of all, thanks to those of you who joined early and were waiting. I welcome you to the call. I'm Amanda Gardiner, Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network USA, and I'm so glad that you could join us for the first of what will be, or what we anticipate will be a regular webinar series exploring the issues that are shaping the future of sustainable business. So each month or so, we'll bring together leaders from across business and beyond business to have candid conversations about challenges they're facing, solutions they may be driving, and just the big ideas that are helping move the field forward right now. My commitment to you is to try and make these conversations practical, relevant, grounded in what's happening right now in the moment inside of companies. And as I said, as we go along, please use that Q&A function, not the chat, to drop any questions that you may have for our guests who join me. So speaking of guests, I am especially pleased to kick off the series, our very first one, with two people that I've had the privilege of knowing and working alongside for many, many years. Ann Tracy, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Colgate-Palmolive, and Steve Goldbach, Sustainability Leader at Deloitte. Today, we're going to tackle a topic that really can't be more timely, and that is how sustainability leaders build and communicate a compelling business case at a time for sustainability at a time when kind of expectations are rising, resources are constrained, and sustainability is becoming increasingly integrated as well into the core business strategy. So, Ann, Steve, thank you both for being here. I think we should jump in.
Great to be here.
Good to be here too.
Great. So I'm going to start somewhat broad, and I'm going to pose this to both of you, whoever wants to take it first. What's it like today leading sustainability inside of your organization?
And maybe you go first since I'm not an actual sustainability leader inside. I kind of serve clients. So why don't you go first?
Yeah, and so you see it from a different lens, but I'm sure you see a lot of similarities. So I'm happy to start. So yeah, I've been in this role for about 6 years now. And it definitely has evolved for sure. I mean, the first thing that probably would be quite obvious, with all the talk about AI out there is we're sharing resources, if you will, with the company. Most companies like ours at Colgate-Palmolive have a secure space where we're learning, our playground, our platform where we're learning about AI. And there's a lot of priority on use cases and how we're building that out to drive efficiencies and drive improve processes. So if you go back a few years, like that just wasn't there. So it's great because we stand to benefit. My profession, the work we're doing stands to benefit tremendously from that as well. So internally, we're sharing across more priorities. And you guys know this as well as anybody else, but the geopolitics, just all the volatility out there that always seems to be relatively constant, but it's always a new thing, whether it's wars or tariffs or whatever the case may be, are also draining and pulling resources, and we're competing there. So yes, we're competing. I like to tell our board that the role I play or the role my team plays and the work we're doing is to keep, while all this kind of dealing with day-to-day volatility and facing what's coming tomorrow and how are we dealing with that, my job is to keep us anchored in the long term. So really focused on managing long-term risks and opportunities, ultimately driving growth for the company, and also ensuring that we have the resilience we need, particularly across our value chain for the future. So I'm trying to keep us one eye on the long term, what's around the corner, while the rest of the business is dealing with kind of what's happening day to day. And we kind of work together that way. So that's how I would answer that question, I think. Steve,
Thanks.
what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a slightly different view given I get a chance to talk to many sustainability leaders. I think what I would summarize is that the tailwinds that the sustainability function was experiencing in the prior administration have effectively gone away. And now, as you well, and then the second thing that's happening is the competition for capital and management attention inside an organization is, what was we were sustainability leaders were winning that battle, and now it's a much, much, much tougher
Upper.
battle because there's both new competition in the form of AI transformation for management attention and the regulatory driven tailwinds that was aiding the management attention are now effectively reduced substantially. And as a result of that, sustainability leaders have to make a business case for why their initiatives need to be funded that is more consistent with how organizations do it. And that's required a lot of change to how sustainability functions think about themselves, what it takes to be a great sustainability leader inside an organization. And we're seeing more folks and who kind of have your background emerging in the role, which is they were folks from the business who can speak to the business in terms that the rest of the organization speaks on a day-to-day basis and less in the term of compliance and other terms that became commonplace in the last iteration of sustainability function. So I think that transformation of the sustainability function is underway. And what I would say, to answer the question, what's it like? Whenever lots of change is happening, it's hard. And I think there's, as a result, a lot of interest in sessions like this and discussions with peers to make sure that the best practice and learning is being shared as much as possible.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there. I mean, we talked about you mentioned competing for resources, tailwinds going away, some of the regulatory pressures going away, though not all, AI, et cetera. In this context, we have to make the business case, but in the larger picture, making the business case for sustainability isn't necessarily a new thing. So sustainability professionals have had to do that for a while. We've been talking about it for years. I guess there's just a different urgency or focus around it today. So why is that? And, what does doing it well actually look like? Or have we been doing it wrong all this time?
So let me tell you the story from our standpoint. And actually, I think our answers were somewhat similar, Steve. We do. I am pleased to say at Colgate we do, balance things and keep an eye on the long term and have full support from the board on down. But yeah, all these competing resources, and without the tailwinds, arguably we have headwinds even now that just makes that urgency all the more real. Although so what I want to do is back up a minute. That if you think about companies, particularly the larger companies, we're setting these bold, ambitious targets in the late teens, early 20s, and they didn't really know how they were going to get there necessarily. And I would say, and we like many of my peer companies have 5-year strategies. So we had a 2025 strategy, and we spent the bulk of 2020 to 2025 working on building the roadmaps. How are we going to do this? How are we going to really achieve these targets? And then the stark reality emerged that yes, it takes investment to get there. It takes investment to take action, but it's not just purely to achieve targets for target's sake. There are real business reasons why we need to do these things to drive long-term resilience of our value chain, to ensure we have accessible and affordable materials that go into our products in the future, to protect our sites from physical risks, which seem to be emerging and growing. And so, but yes, there's investment required, and now we're finding ourselves in a place where we have to, like anything else, I say, sustainability is no different than making investments in where you're going to put capacity in the world, where are you going to, make an M&A or whatever. It's you have to make sure you understand what are the priorities for the business, what are the biggest risks, and it's all about decision making. And we don't have an open checkbook, so we have to prioritize and make decisions. And by putting more discipline around understanding the the value creation, but really prioritizing the biggest risks and the biggest opportunities. And you need financial discipline and rigor to do that well. And that's kind of what's behind what we're going to talk about today. If you don't do that, you cannot, you're not going to achieve ultimately what you need to and do the best thing for the business in the long term. So yes, this has always been around. I just think that what we're doing today has matured to the point where we're in an action-oriented, implementation-oriented phase that requires investment, and we need, like anything else we do in our business, AI included, we need to come with the capital or the expense drawdown and why we need that money. So that's kind of what we've been trying to focus on, building the case around a solid business case so we can show up next to my AI peer or my supply chain peer who wants to build a new plant or whatever the case may be.
And I know I want Steve to come in here, but before that, one of the things you said in the first question, Ann, was that your team's role is anchored in the long term and kind of identifying the long term and making the case for managing long-term risks and opportunities. But given all of what you've just said and the need to be better at making the short-term business case, how do you balance that? Is the business still seeing you as we want a long-term view, or are they asking for a shorter-term view?
Well, it's a good question, and maybe Steve can expand on the time frame. But we are being very, and I'm lucky because I have a CFO who really kind of gets this. Do we have a little more lenient? Most of us businesses want a 2 to 3 year payback. I say that. Some people come to me and say, "Oh no, I need a 1 or 2 year payback." I mean, and some of the things we're doing doesn't have that quick of a payback. So there is some understanding there. Like we have a VPPA that's a 20-year commitment. So there's an understanding that some of what we're doing is long term, but the consequences of not starting to address them now are very big, and they get more expensive if you don't take action now. So that's, I think, but that's up to us to articulate that in a clear and understandable way.
Steve, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ann said it well. If I were to just add a very little bit, I would say I don't think it's new now or different. However, without the tailwinds and without the the tailwinds of both regulatory and companies trying to jump in and say, I'm going to have net zero commitments and in that same time frame, the capital needs to stand on its own. And so to some extent, that was true. but the other tailwinds were masking that need, and more capital was being deployed to sustainability because of that. Now it needs to stand on its own, and it needs to stand, again, in competition with other initiatives like AI. And so we've got to be, as a sustainability community, disciplined in saying there's a great economic story there. The good news is there's a great economic story there. If I don't know how many of the 90 participants are regular listeners of the All In podcast, and I know the All In podcast is not exactly a bastion of sustainability focused folks, but there was a great debate in this weekend's podcast about whether nuclear would be relevant because there was so much solar plus batteries being deployed to the grid and the cost was coming down and the exponential explosion of renewables. And there was a debate between them. It's like, oh, nuclear fusion in China is going to be turning seawater into net zero energy. And so there's a lot of need to deploy energy fast, and that's going to drive a lot of, capital into sustainability because frankly, the supply chains for, non-renewable energy are so long right now, and the world needs lots of energy. And it just so happens that there's a great economic case for that. So we should make it.
Yep.
I love that though. I love the way you frame that as there's more exposure now for states and pressure for sustainability teams to make the financial case because some of the other drivers we had have dried up in some respects. So that's interesting. Just to stick with you, Steve, for a moment, you've been driving this the development of this new tool, Sustainability Fusion, and I think my team is going to put it in the chat so others could see it or at least link to it later. And its purpose is to really help teams make the business case more effectively. So can you tell us a little bit about that, how it came to be, what it aims to do, what its purpose is, and kind of what does it help teams figure out that they couldn't figure out before? What does it help the business figure out?
Well, I will just say, and this is Victoria has got a question in the Q&A that is going to get answered by this. So I'm just flagging it for her that we're going to answer that particular question now. I
Good.
will start by saying that as much as I love Sustainability Fusion and all the work that we're doing, there is nothing inherently new that comes out of this that wasn't already being applied somewhere else in the business, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
The point is what we've learned is that many sustainability professionals, somewhere in the realm of 50 to 60%, feel like they don't have the requisite financial acumen in order to make a business case. And what we're doing is providing a super simple framework so that sustainability professionals can go and create the business logic that is compelling for whatever it is. And to Victoria's question, it's going to be different based on every organization. So there's not one best practice that says it's always about cost reduction or revenue generation, but you need to look for what is going to resonate with the executives that you're pitching. That's a super important thing. If I were to lay it out really simply, what we care about at the end of the day is cash flow. Okay. And cash flow adjusted for tax. And I'll come back to that in a second. And you can generate cash flow in two very simple ways. You can either generate revenue or you can reduce costs. Okay. That's how you can generate cash flow. And if you're generating cash flow, you can either generate new revenue or you can protect revenue that you currently have that is at risk if something happens, and sustainability investments can often protect existing revenue. So number one, generate revenue, protect it. And then from costs, you can reduce costs, or again, you can avoid future increases in costs that can come from all kinds of things, whether it's avoiding risk, mitigating disasters, etc. To any of these, there is a aspect of one time versus recurring that is important to think about. And sometimes with your investments, you have to spend some money at the front. So you have to, in order to create the outcomes for that. So you have to net that investment. But that very simple framework allows you to figure out how much cash and how and over what time frame that your sustainability initiative will impact the business. And what Fusion does is it just gives you lots of different brainstorming ideas for ways in which your sustainability investment could impact. One last thing. I said tax at the beginning. The one thing I'll say is that you do in this space really need to think about the tax adjusted impact because so many of the investments that sustainability professionals make have some associated tax credit available to them. And it's important that you include those benefits because that's real cash flow to your organization. So I'm sure Anne has like a specific example that she could perhaps take you through, but that's sort of the general framework.
That's a perfect lead up. I think, Anne, if you have an example, I think we'd love to hear it. Can you give us kind of a real example of applying this framework or of learning from it?
Yeah, so maybe just a quick minute on how we're applying it because we've worked with Steve and his team on developing what I would call the Colgate version to this. So I think they put the link to the Fusion model in there. What we did was we like to say we Colgatized it. So we took it and made it fit for purpose for our needs here, for our culture, for how people use it in the existing business processes like budgeting and capital allocation and stuff like that. So we, and I'm not going to take credit. The credit goes to Steve. We sat down at lunch one time before all this started, and he said, it comes down to three things: dollars created, dollars saved, or dollars protected. And so I walked back across the street to my house over here at Colgate, and I talked to my CFO and my CEO, and I said, it's about dollars created, dollars saved, dollars protected. They're like, oh, I really like that. And that really it resonated.
Love
It
this.
totally resonated. It was very simple, a simple framework. So even though in the Fusion model, you'll see kind of a construct of four areas, we boiled it down to those three, and we call those three the value category, the value driving category, or the value creation category. And then what Fusion does is then if you double click into those three areas, they will provide the examples of, as Steve said, kind of how you can do that. And so now you apply a real business like ours. So I can give you an example in each. So we're just launching now we're going to eventually launch it globally, but a new packaging format for our toothbrushes, which so it started out to eliminate plastic. And for those of you who do anything with plastic or plastic packaging of any types, we pay something called an EPR fee, an extended producer responsibility fee, terrible acronym, but it is basically we pay a fee for the amount of plastic that we use. And that number has gone up exponentially over the last, and this is a global phenomenon. More and more countries, even more states in the US are now bringing it on, and it's in the tens of millions of dollars. So we wanted to eliminate the plastic from our toothbrush packaging. So what we did was we moved to full all fiber in most cases. Some have a little plastic window still. So we eliminated close to 90% of the plastic. And marketing got very excited because they made it stand out on shelf to be different than all the other toothbrushes. Okay. So it really became a differentiator on shelf. We say it made it more shoppable. It had really positive testing results. And then the other pain point that consumers have, which you may think about it if you use a manual toothbrush, is those darn plastic bagger cards are next to impossible to open. They're so hard. You have to get like a scissor, a knife, and stab it. And so this is like really easy. Fiber, open it, use your toothbrush and go. So we did a lot of things that helped the consumer as first and foremost. And so that's a great example. We expect, it's very early days, but we expect to generate more revenue because we're going to be, more noticeable. We're going to be less painful to open. So people are going to like it and come back. So that's a generation. Saved, any of you who work in manufacturing plants or have operations, there's multiple examples that over the years we've been doing this. Like Steve said, this is not new, but putting in more efficient boilers or heat exchangers or lighting or whatever. These are all good things for the plant, for the operation, because they're more efficient. So they save money, but they're also much less impact on the planet. So that's saved and protected. We for protected, um, I go back to this example I just gave you on the toothbrush packaging. We also are lowering our EPR fees. It was generated because we're creating a better product for consumers, but it also creates an avoidance of EPR fees. And we put under protection, we put avoided fees. So there's lots of examples. Those are, a few, and we have lots of others. So we actually created a framework, a simple one-page framework that incorporates a lot of the examples that the Fusion module provides. And we're going to probably put an AI front end on it so it's easy to use. But we are in a pilot mode, and we've taken several dozen projects through this, and we've received really good feedback so far. Probably the best testimony is that other parts of the business now are talking about using the same framework. Like Steve said, we've been doing this, you could say, oh, this is for sustainability initiatives, but you could use this for AI initiatives or quality initiatives or other initiatives. It's generic enough, but it really just lays out in a very organized and robust and disciplined way the kind of the financial drivers that you need to consider whenever you're trying to justify a project.
Thank you. That was really, really helpful. I'm going to come back to AI because you mentioned it. We also have a question about AI. But first, let me just ask you because I like the way you also frame that with dollars made, dollars saved, dollars protected, I think
Protected.
it was. Yeah. I mean, just out of curiosity, is it easier to make an argument for does the business respond better to one of those arguments, or is it easier to make an argument for dollars saved than dollars made, for example?
Well, if you're talking to your finance friends, whenever you can put a hard dollar on something, they're going to love that more because that's what they are, finance people. But in some cases, some of the work we do is, is more a directional, future forward estimate. It's more directional in nature. As long as you have a solid justification around sitting behind why this is directional, many companies have enterprise risk management programs in place, and that's usually based on severity and frequency and severity of impact. Is it material or enough financially to the company? That is a directional estimate. So the companies are used to doing directional estimates already, and that's okay. But to your question, I mean, if you can put a hard dollar on it, anybody likes that more. But it's okay to use directional estimates as long as you have the right justification behind it.
Okay. Steve, I don't know if you want to come in on that, but I guess I'm going to push on it a little bit more. So it sounds like this is allowing the Fusion framework has allowed Colgate and allows others to kind of put directional costs on things, even if they're not easily quantified or haven't been easily quantifiable. Um, are there examples where you just can't do that, where you just can't put a number on the value? And if so, how would you make that case, or how could you use Fusion to make that case?
So I will just let you in on some of the debates that we've had inside Deloitte. And just as a reminder, this was developed in partnership with the Aspen Business and Society program, and we had the great input of a lot of sustainability professionals who are closely related there. I think 20, 25 or so CSOs and other sustainability professionals. What you just asked about was one of the great debates that we continually had throughout that process. I will, and I think I told this story in a conference recently. There's a great movie that I love from the late 90s or early 2000s, directed by Jodie Foster, called Little Man Tate, where he's in, it's a little boy genius, and he's, in the classroom, and the teacher asks which of the following numbers can be divided by two, and he basically just says all of them. right? And he's making the point that everything gets divided by two. It's a question of whether there's a decimal or not, and not whether or not. So my belief is kind of like little man Tate. Anything can get quantified, right? We can make assumptions to quantify the most unquantifiable things. We can assign probabilities, we can assign costs. I think the bigger question is to what extent our assumptions are believable by the organizations and real and not just made up. And so my advice to solving this challenge is it's always best, I think, to try and figure out whether your decision is contingent on something that's really hard to quantify being accurately quantified. A lot of the time, a lot of the time, the decision is made by things that are actually pretty quantifiable, whether it's cost savings or a bet about revenue generation. And the stuff that's not quantifiable is just gravy, right? Oh, we'll have a better reputation or we'll mitigate risk. And it's like, okay, well, that's gravy on top of what should be an otherwise easy
Hmm.
business case. If you're doing something that is really fully in the gray zone, what it makes sense, I think, to do is try to characterize the bet that you're making and then put it on the table. So I'm betting that by taking undertaking the sustainability initiative, we are reducing the probability that we suffer a catastrophic event, which would have the following which would have the following cash flow impact if we did have it. So our plant would have to go down for 3 weeks. And when we do that, it costs this much money. And by investing in this protection and this hardening of our operations, we are mitigating against natural disasters and reducing the probability of that happening from, you know, expert, 5% down to 1%, and that has this expected value creation. That to some extent helps you characterize like what do you have to believe for the investment to be made. And as Ann well said, we have enterprise risk management tools that are used to defining things like that. I always find it's just helpful to put some parameters around the bet that you're trying to make, even just to make sure that as a mechanism of aligning everybody on the business logic. But I think again, this is less about the quantification and more about the logic that's associated with any of that, and laying that out allows you to have a productive conversations with non-sustainability business leaders.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back. We have a question. So we're at quarter two. If anybody has questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We have a couple here, and I want to come back because Karen has asked one a while back about AI. AI and sustainability seem to be in conflict. How are your companies addressing those? Now that's a bigger, broader question, I think, than sustainability that goes beyond what we're trying to talk about here. But maybe alongside that, just to both of you, um, is are AI and sustainability in conflict, or where do you see AI kind of helping sustainability teams strengthen the business case, make better decisions, et cetera?
I'm happy to jump in here and at least and go first if I might, and then Ann can build on it.
Yep.
Look, this is a complicated question. So let's just name that it's going to be impossible for the three of us to fully address every plausible issue. There's obviously a short-term, incredible increase in the amount of energy that society needs to produce to power AI. There's also an expected benefit in, things very short term, like if you talk to people who are in the HVAC business, that just AI alone can increase heating and air conditioning efficiency by 30-40% and increase of other inefficiencies. So we should see corresponding efficiency gains. It's also likely that AI could lead to other future developments. And then the other countervailing factor is, for a period of time, and remember, this is all evolving very quickly. For a period of time, the world was kind of just letting people, as the kids like to say these days, token max, where they're just using as much AI as possible. And I think we're seeing more companies put cost related guardrails on that. And as you put cost-related guardrails on it, you'll also see that sort of slow down the pace of energy energy growth. And then finally, the thing that's a bit unknown is this challenge was the energy challenge was also in existence when the internet first launched, and the folks at Google said they predicted that there would be dramatic increases in the efficiency of the back end, and so we anticipate there's going to be much more efficient AI use in the future. So again, clearly this is a moment where there's a number of competing factors that could, debate whether AI is net positive, net negative. I think the most important thing we must do is AI is clearly here. It's going to continue. The question is, how can we frame it so that we maximize the probability that it is a net benefit to sustainability efforts? And I think it has my view is I think it has great potential to do so, but obviously you can't just assume that that's going to happen without any steering towards it.
And do you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, like Steve said, there's so many angles to this. There's the actual concerns about energy and water that AI take in terms of the compute power and what it requires versus how does it actually get applied to make the world a better place because of the power of its ability to harness data in a free text form and really, have, get you to solutions exponentially faster than you would have otherwise. So there's application and there's execution. I will tell you, and because we get this question a lot from our employees, when we first looked at it, and it's probably gone up some, but it's still less than 0.1% of our footprint. And I'm sure it's gone up some, but the burden of the energy and all, use from AI really falls on the hyperscalers, the Microsofts, the Metas, the Googles and all of that. So they are the ones where you see that they're struggling a little bit, frankly, because they have these net zero carbon targets and they've moved in the wrong direction because of this. So they're wrestling with this and they're taking that very seriously. I happen to know Melanie pretty well over at Microsoft, and to leave you with a little more optimistic, because if you can't tell, I'm always trying to be optimistic, but they are doing so much work on how to develop more optimized data centers that are reducing the drain on energy, and even more importantly, ways to cool that are not so water intensive. So they're not standing still, as Steve said. It takes work, but they're definitely looking at that, trying to understand that. And that is why, we need all the energy we can get in the world, not just fossil fuel, frankly, but renewable as well. And that's why all of that is going to be important for the future. So, and then when it comes to actually the compute side of it, to applying it, there's so many exciting things we're doing, like looking at, very quickly developing what would have taken 2 years, 2 weeks to develop a new material that might meet our specifications. So material science applications, by marrying together the specifications of what we need with the reams of different materials out there and trying to come together. What would have taken a scientist trial and error, like I said, several years, can be done very quickly. So there's ways to get to good practical solutions quicker. Of course, the governance behind all this and people who aren't going to use it in the right way. I mean, these are all the things we're wrestling with, which, like Steve said, for those of us old enough to remember when the internet popped, those were the same questions we were asking back then.
Yeah. Okay, lest we go off on the AI freight train, I'm going to bring it back a little bit, but kind of build on something that Ann, you were just saying, and we have a couple of questions. I hope we can get it all in. Colgate's a large company. How are you thinking about bringing suppliers along with you on the sustainability journey? So what role do suppliers play in your kind of value creation framework that you've talked about? And how does the tool the Sustainability Fusion tool, the Colgated version of it, help create stronger kind of partnerships across the value chain?
Yeah, so we have tens of thousands of suppliers, but like anything else that's so broad and complex and vast, you have to prioritize, and you do that by segmenting your suppliers into tier one, tier two, tier three, and we can do that as well in the context of how the ingredients, either in volume or in type, material type, contribute to our footprint. So our suppliers purchase goods and services make up the bulk of our scope three. And so we are partnering. And if we Pareto that, and don't quote me on this, but I something like the top 100, 120 suppliers make up over 50% of our scope three. So that 100 to 120, less than 150 is much easier to deal with than tens of thousands. So we will focus on those suppliers first. And we have developed, partnership relationships on this topic specifically, and set our expectations. And they're quite a range of maturity, honestly. Some big suppliers like BASF are way ahead of us, and some are nowhere. So it's all over the place, and that's okay. And so we're in the process of educating, setting expectations, not unlike the Walmart Gigaton, which maybe some of the people in the audience have participated in. We're the scope three for Walmart. So it's a journey. I think we're a little bit like 5 years behind where we were when we started this journey. So it's going to take time, but we definitely count on suppliers to be on the journey with us.
Great. And then we have a question from Joyce in the Q&A, that I might direct to you, Steve. If she talks about the business case, but then asks, could both of you dive deeper into how to get buy-in from boards and senior executives where you might have limited time for the sustainability department? So just getting in front of the boards and the executive team might be difficult. How do you get that buy-in? And how do you get buy-in from the different departments to be part of sustainability KPIs?
Well, I will address boards and leadership teams, and then I think different departments require something slightly different. So boards and executive teams, as much as possible, first of all, I will say you got to treat every individual board member and executive as a human. They each have different motivations, and if you can find their why for this, that you're much better off, much better off. I would also start by trying to tie it into something that they have actively already said that that they're trying to hit, and figure out how your sustainability initiative or initiatives help them achieve their stated goal. So you do your best when you can tie it back to something that's important to that board member. Clearly, to the extent that you can, some degree of one-on-one time asking the executive or board member what's important to them is critical to that. And if it's sometimes that's easier, sometimes that's harder, depending on the organization. The generalizable advice is, as much as possible, don't go in and tell them what you think is important. Go in and ask them what's important and figure out a way to tie what you're working on to that thing. I think the mistake that too many of us make is using the same arguments that resonate with us and failing to actually listen to other people about what's important to them. On the
Such a
qu
good point.
Yeah. And I'll do this really quickly because Natalie's reminding us that we've got 5 minutes. On the other departments, I think that's where you have to start with the most senior executives. They need to give you the ability to go in and give you some headspace and room to maneuver. Look, I think if you don't have that, and many of you won't in your organizations, again, go back to tying how what you're doing supports what the other department is trying to do. That's your best strategy. But another strategy would be to try and get executive leadership to give you some runway for what you're trying to do so that other departments have to work with you. So those are two strategies you can employ.
Okay, I have two more questions. One is to either of you, and then we'll have one closing question. I think there's somebody in the chat who has asked, probably in follow-up and to some of your discussion about suppliers. Could a tier two, three supplier or a smaller company, for example, that doesn't have, 10 people or more in its sustainability department, use the sustainability fusion, use a tool like this and run it themselves? Or do they need consulting support or other kinds of support? So maybe each of you have a view on that. And based on experience, Steve, based on design.
Yeah, I mean, what we did, like I said earlier, is we took the fusion model and we kind of developed a very simple one pager, which, depending on who you are and if you're non-compete, not a supplier, I'd be happy to kind of connect with you and share because it's very simple. And so if you don't have a sustainability function, again, this is meant to be what's good for the business. So you probably have somebody who buys the materials that you need to make whatever you make. So that would be like a procurement person, or you probably have a finance person. They definitely could use this tool easily. And like I said earlier, other functions in our business are looking at using it. So it means it's pretty, it's not a sustainability oriented. The whole idea is to get away from sustainability language entirely and to just make it about pure kind of speaking to the business talk, what resonates with the business, whether it's the CFO or the board, or even just working with the supply chain directly or a plant manager at a plant. So all of those, it's supposed to be simple and easy, compelling and easy to understand, and taking the sustainability speak out of it. So it's even better if you don't have a sustainability person. You just you just use
Love
it.
that. Steve, anything to add there?
I will say, as much as I'd love everybody to use Deloitte, we didn't design this with our help in mind. This is for everyone to use themselves. And so it's totally, you don't need a consultant to help you with it. I think it's about the logic.
Love that. Okay, closing question. Here's something we're going to ask every guest that we have in the series going forward. So, in your view, what is the single biggest factor shaping sustainability leadership today? Probably less than 30 seconds each.
I think what we're talking about here, just it's tying it back to the value creation in the business, make it a non-thing, have it compete for capital on its own, and I think it takes the case.
And I would say the same thing. This is the most important thing right now. This is the difference between our 2025 and our 2030 strategy.
Ann and Steve, thank you both so much. It has been a pleasure, not only because you're both leaders I respect tremendously, but also just because I've had the privilege of calling you colleagues and friends over many years. So thank you for sharing your insights, helping us kick off the series. And thank everyone who's joined us. I hope you found it practical, thought-provoking, relevant to some of the work you're doing every day, really. And our next conversation is going to be later this month with Ellen Weinreb, one of the leading voices in sustainability executive search. She's going to be sharing some new data from Weinreb Consulting's latest report on trends in sustainability hiring. So I hope everyone will join us then. Thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. And yes, we will share it out as a link, the framework. Thanks all.
Thanks.